All right, so I wanted to start doing some videos on various connectors that are available in Power Automate. I figured one of the more start with more common ones, but especially start with OneDrive in particular, as it's one of the most common ones that's in use here. So let's go ahead and jump over to our setup here. All right, so here we are in the Power Automate interface. We're going to start with the triggers that are available. So we're going to start with OneDrive. So just looking for a OneDrive triggers. So we'll start with that. You'll notice that they'll come up here. Sometimes you might see the OneDrive for business. Sometimes you might see the OneDrive for personal accounts. We're going to look at the OneDrive for personal accounts today. So let's just talk about a little bit about some of the triggers that are available first. So mostly the triggers that are available to you in OneDrive personal account have to do with when a file is either created, modified, or updated. So you'll see a list of various things here. You can see the OneDrive for Business ones come up here down at the bottom. But we're just going to focus on these, the OneDrive for personal accounts. So you'll see that for modified and for created, there's two different ones that'll appear for each of those. So you'll see one that says properties only, and you'll see the one that just says when a file is created. Same thing for modified. You'll see one that's just, when a file is modified, or when a file is modified with properties only. So the differences between those two triggers is when a file is created, it will trigger on every single file that is created, and it will return in the response the data in the file. So the actual file itself gets returned to your flow. And that will only trigger for files up to 50 megabytes in size. If the file is any bigger than that, it will not trigger. Also, if you're like moving a file from place to place within your OneDrive, it also will not trigger then. It only happens when a brand new file is created. When a file is created with properties only, and the same thing with modified, the difference between the two of those versions, or the difference on that one, is it will kind of group them together. So if a bunch of files are created at the same time, it will return to you a list of those files with the properties for each file. It won't return the actual files themselves. Unlike this one here, this one will only return the properties that come from that file. And it will group them together into a list up to, you can set the variety. So for instance here, if I go ahead and click on that here, and put a name on here. So with this, you can set the number of files to be grouped together, the maximum number of files. So if we create that, and if we look at the parameters here, you'll select the folder, but there's also parameters. So for instance, how often do you want to check? So you can set that interval. So if you say, okay, once an hour, I want you to go in there and get me the list of files that were created. And you can also set the whether or not you want to include subfolders, and the maximum number of files to return. So if you say, okay, maybe every hour I'm going to create, up to 10 files, and you want to trigger something that collects them all at once, you can set that. By default, it'll just give, up to 100 files total. But beyond that, it won't give you any more than that. So if you have something that's going to be creating a lot more files than that, some process, then you need to make sure that you're either running your check more often, or come up with some other way to gather all that data. So let's go ahead and look at that. We'll just select a folder here. Okay, so I have selected a folder here in my OneDrive as test file or test folder that I've created here. And I'm gonna say include subfolders no, and I'm just gonna say check for up to 10 files being created, and we'll check every minute. That's fine. Some standard good defaults here. So let's just, for this test, just make it really simple. Let's say, okay, I want to, when that file is created, I just want to go immediately and let's just go ahead and delete the file immediately. So the file that we're going to come in here is the output of our, that's not showing up very well here. The file is created. I'm going to select the ID of the file that was created. All right. So let's just go ahead and test that. Save that. Go ahead and do test. Manually test. All right. And I'm going to create a file here. And I've created on my local machine. Just give it a second here to sync. Let's make sure that works. Okay, it looks like it's running now. All right, and it has run. It has run successfully. So let's look at the output results here. So we have a file, folder ID, includes subfolders false, up to 10 files. The outputs here. So let's look at that. So it created a file called test copy, which is the file that I created. And then in the next step, you can see here, start and end time, status succeeded, so it successfully deleted the file. So that's a really simple way to get going with the OneDrive stuff here. Okay, so let's delve a little bit into what I did here with this particular flow. So most of the OneDrive things work the same way. You'll have a reference to a file or a folder. And you can go about it a couple different ways. You could either use, the dialog here if it's a known file or folder. You can use the dialog here to select the file or folder specifically that you want to work with. In this case, the one I want to delete. In another case, you can pass in the OneDrive ID, which is what I did in this particular case. You can get that, here I grabbed that from the output from my trigger here. So as I mentioned here, this file was created and it's passing the properties, and one of the properties is an ID, which is a globally unique ID that OneDrive provides to you to identify the file that you want to work with. You can also, if you know the name, you can actually put in the path. So I could do like, if I knew what folder it was, I could do like, folder 1 / folder 2 / and then I could pass in the file name. You could type it in manually, something like that, or you could even do, if you want to get the file name from the previous step, then I could do like file name and do it that way. I would get rid of the ID here, but so there's a number of different ways that you can reference the file that you want to work with and interact with. And obviously, if there was more than one file, I mentioned this will give you a list of files if you have it set to more than one. In this particular case, with the default, it'll just give you one file at a time. Or sorry, no, I set it to 10, didn't I? In this case, it would give you a list of files. So that's one of the things that you'll have to set up to work with it correctly. In this particular case, I just did this. If it had passed in a list of files, that's another thing that you kind of have to watch out for. If it passes in only one, in this particular case here, if we go look at the results or the output here, if we go look at the output from the test run that we did, so you can see here with the outputs, gave me a single file, but if there had been more than one file, it would have returned as a list. So you have to kind of watch out for that, and you have to plan for that. It's not ideal in this particular case. So if I was going to do this, I'd probably make it easy on myself and just do maximum one file at a time. That way, for each file, or actually, it would just give me the first file. So you'd have to kind of work around that and figure out, okay, look at the output, say, okay, is this a list or is this a Um, is it a list or is it a single item? Because the JSON will be structured differently, so you kind of have to watch that in this particular case. So that's one way that you can do it. But pretty much all of the actions in as far as it related to OneDrive work the same way. So let's kind of look at some of what the other actions that are available are. So let's look at some of the other stuff that you can do with OneDrive as far as like the actions go. So again, let's select OneDrive, and we're going to scroll down here for OneDrive for Business, or sorry, OneDrive for Personal. So there are a number of things that you can do. So among the things that you can take as far as the actions go, you can create a file. So what that will do is, you can just create a file and throw some content into it. That can be either text or binary or whatever you want to do. You can get a list of all the files in a particular folder. You can add tags to a file. So just, if you have something you want a process that automatically goes in, looks at files in a folder, maybe it identifies something about the file. Maybe it's got like text content that it searches through, and then you can just add a tag to the file. So it's automatic tagging of files, so you can come up with some processes for that. There is converting files. So this is in preview, and there's a limited amount of stuff that you can do. But among the things that it's capable of doing is, for instance, you can convert a markdown file into HTML. You can convert a bunch of different image file formats into JPEG format. You can also convert a number of different file formats into PDF files. It's got some quirks to it. It's not perfect, but it works pretty well for what it does so far. For instance, like the PDF, you can do a lot of Office documents, Word documents, Excel, PowerPoint. You can convert those into PDFs. You can do like HTML files. So like if you download a web page and convert that into a PDF file. Text files, a few image formats like TIFF. Not a whole lot there. Markdown files you can convert to PDF. So there's a lot of stuff that you can do with it, but it's pretty good so far. I've done it a few tests with a few different types of files, and it seems to work pretty well so far. You can copy files. You can create a share link. So if you want to automate giving people the ability to edit files within your OneDrive, you can create a share link there. Deleting file, we just demonstrated that. Archives. So you can create zip archives and extract files from those archives. There are some pretty significant limits. For instance, none of the files can be bigger than 50 megabytes. The archive itself can't be bigger than 50 megabytes, if I remember right. So it's fairly small in what it can do, considering the sizes of files these days. So there are some limits on that, but it does work pretty well. You can search for files. You can get the content of a file. It could be binary content, text content. This is really useful if you want to pass the contents of a file to another service. I used to have a flow before they completely screwed up the Twitter connector. I used to have a flow where it would get the contents of an image file and attach that image content, because you had to output it in like base 64 or something like that for the Twitter feed to attach a picture to a tweet. So that was I would use that. So there's stuff there. You can get the metadata off a file. You get the tags off a file. For images, you can generate thumbnails and get that off of an image file. So one of the limitations of getting a thumbnail is that thumbnail will only exist for a few hours. I think, 6 hours. I'm just looking over here at the docs on the side. So you can generate an image thumbnail and it'll be there for a little while. So if you just need like a short-term one, or you can, once you get that thumbnail, you can actually save it off into its own image file if you need a more permanent copy of that. What else can you do? So obviously you can move files, or you can rename files. In this connector, moving and renaming is essentially the same thing. It's you know, renaming it and moving it is basically just putting it in a different position with either the same name or a different name. Because being a different name in the same folder is in a different position. So it's the same thing. You can take off tags. You can also do updating a file. This one, yeah, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I've had some issues with that in the past. Um, but I think I think they've resolved most of the issues that were around that. It's been a while since I played with it, but I remember in the past that when I would try to update the contents of a file, it doesn't matter what that contents are. Binary, it could be text, whatever. Um, when I've tried to update it, sometimes it would throw like permissions errors, like maybe more than one process was trying to access the file at the same time. Like I say, I think they've resolved most of that that I've run into. I don't recall running into that in the last little while, but I have had some problems with that in the past. And then uploading a file from a URL, so you can go out to a URL, download a file, and then save it to your OneDrive. This one also has some limitations. If the file does, excuse me, there are some size limitations. If the file doesn't download quickly enough, so I think it's I'd have to look up here at the list, but it's like 15 or 20 seconds. If the file doesn't download and save in that amount of time, it fails. Um, and there's size limitations too. I think again, as with most of the size limitations around OneDrive, I think it's 50 megabytes. So if it's bigger than that, it doesn't work because it won't save it off in time. What else is there? So just kind of looking through some of the known limitations and issues. I mentioned the 50 megabyte size limit several times. Pretty much anything you do, if the file size is bigger than that, if you're doing anything other than like moving or renaming it, it is generally going to have issues. Especially the triggers. Obviously, if the file is bigger than 50 megabytes, the triggers don't work at all. They will not trigger. Hey there, it's me from the future. Just to clarify, the 50 megabyte limit only applies to the two triggers where it returns the file contents. So it's when a file is created or when a file is modified. The ones that return the contents of the file, those are limited by the 50 megabyte limit. The when a file is created where it returns the properties and the modified one, those are not affected by the 50 megabyte limit. So just to clarify that little detail there. Uh, Anything bigger than any of the other, like all the actions, you just kind of have to test and see. A lot of the actions, there's a time limit. It's like 20 seconds or something like that. If it doesn't complete within that amount of time, it'll tell you it succeeded even though it didn't. Um, so you just kind of have to play around with that and just to see what happens most of the time. For instance, like the upload file from URL, when it hits that 20-second mark, whether or not it's successful or not, it'll tell you it was successful. So if you're really sometimes it will still continue downloading and save. Sometimes it won't. So if you're going to be using that and you know that it's going to be more than 20 seconds sometimes, you want to make sure you put in some processing to maybe pause the processing of the flow and then verify that the file is successful, that it's actually there before you try to do something with that file. One of the other biggest limitations, of course, is you cannot access or move content across tenants, across accounts. If it's from one account to another account, that doesn't work. You can't do that. If you've got accounts in different tenants in different geographies, none of that works across that. So it's got to be the one account. It's got to be local. It's got to be in the same geo area for it to work. There are also issues a lot of times where you get like access denied errors. So if you have any other process that's touching the same file at the same time that you're trying to do something with the OneDrive connector, it will throw that access denied error. And it won't tell you what it is that's happening. You'll just get that access denied error. So one of the things you want to do to make it really robust is to put in like error checking, things like that. Say, okay, if you give me this particular access denied error, let's wait 5 minutes and try again, and maybe loop through that a few times. And then if it fails several times, then you throw a final error. So that's one of the things that you'll have to do um, to kind of be mindful of as you're working with OneDrive files. And that's true for OneDrive for personal accounts and OneDrive for business. You'll find they have both of the versions. There's not a lot of difference between the two. They have a lot of the same quirks. There are a few, I think, actions that OneDrive for business has that OneDrive for personal accounts doesn't. But that's really the biggest difference between the two. Other than that, you've got all the same caveats, you've got all the same limitations, you've got all the same issues that can come along, that kind of thing. And the other biggest thing to remember uh, is if you're moving files or you're doing things within OneDrive, then that, when a file is created, when a file is modified, those triggers won't trigger. So like if you rename a file, that doesn't count as modifying the file. If you move a file from one folder to another folder, again, that does not count as modifying a file. It won't trigger that modified. It won't trigger that create or any of that. So just a couple things to keep in mind as you're working with that. Really, that's about it. I mean, there are, obviously there's the full documentation out there. There are a few items that you may see that are listed as deprecated. Most of those they kind of hide from you now, so you don't see those much anymore. But you still may see something pop up like older versions that say deprecated. But in general, it's fairly simple to work with files on OneDrive, and you can do a lot of really amazing stuff with it. So that's it for now. Thank you, and we'll see you later.